Hi there, thanks so much. Just to mention, our presentation's only about half as long as our bios. Thanks so much, Doreen. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, my name's Dylan Mazur. Today we're going to do a presentation that I'm sharing with my colleague Mariana Martinez Vieyra, really looking at what we're calling Rebuilding Community in Canada. It's a model for group-based mental health for refugee claimants, and try to make this quite practical, because I know there are organizations out there online who might be small like us and want to do work with refugee claimants. This is a model that has come about in the last year, and it's a model that's been incredibly successful. So I'm going to try and set a bit of the context first of the organization and our work, and then turn over to Mariana to talk about the group itself. And so I hope if anyone has questions for us afterwards, that we can certainly talk about it here, or you can contact us directly through by phone or by email, just through our website. Please feel free to do that. We're more than happy to collaborate. This isn't trademarked, so you're welcome to share the work. I'm just going to talk about VAST a bit. VAST was founded in 1986 to promote the human rights and mental health of refugees who arrive in British Columbia with psychological trauma as a result of torture, political violence, and other forms of persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, and political opinion. And I think the hallmark of the work is that we work at the intersections of human rights and mental health. VAST was founded by members of Amnesty International and volunteer mental health providers at the time, really to respond to the internal armed conflicts of Central America. So part of our work, and really the ethos of the work, is working at these intersections of human rights and mental health. And I think that happens in a couple ways. I think part of it is really looking at this idea that that the people who come to see us aren't broken. I think we all sort of, in this work, understand the strengths that people come to us with, that people don't come with a pathology. And it reminds me a bit of what the El Salvadoran psychologist Ignacio Martin Burrow said, that really what people are experiencing are normal reactions and defenses to pathological circumstances. And part of that work is understanding that what people are experiencing is normal within the context of political violence. And two, to look at throughout the organization that we have an understanding of what political violence is, what torture is. That torture really is about breaking down the will of the person, and that political violence is breaking down the will of the community. From a lot of the work that I've done in country, and certainly have seen with refugees, that one of the effects that people experiencing really universally, I think, who come out of political violence, is this rupturing of the social fabric, which is really about that political violence has been about tearing apart social movements, whether they be labor movements, indigenous movements, women's movements, LGBT movements. It's really about tearing apart the community and the family. And ultimately, through torture, it's about breaking down the person themselves. So this idea of working at the intersections of human rights and mental health is knowing that any sort of treatment is going to address those factors. And so the idea of doing group-based work is really about how do you build the community and rebuild and recreate community within the Canadian context, within the refugee context, to really look at rebuilding the social fabric within the Canadian context here. So that's really what this conversation is about today. So just to give you a sense, we're very small. We're 4 people. We all have, there's 2 clinical counselors who, master's level, who are registered clinical counselors. And I have a social work background, a law background. And we generally, between the 4 of us, are doing all of the work of the organization. It's a fair bit. This is not necessarily by choice, but it's the reality of funding that happens, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. I also want to just acknowledge two people that have also been really helpful to us, especially in setting up this group. One is Kirby Humanuk, who is a doctoral candidate at UBC in counseling psychology, and Sherilyn Jordan, who's associate professor of counseling psychology at SFU. They're really instrumental in being part of developing this group with us, with Mariana and I, and so I want to acknowledge their participation as well. And so our services, just in general, just to give you a sense of this is the work that we do. We do assessment for symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and psychosocial functioning. We're not physicians, so we don't do diagnoses, but really what we do through a basic clinical interview and some standardized measurement tools which we've implemented in the last year, parts 3 and 4 of the Harvard Trauma Questionnaire and the Hopkins Symptoms Checklist, the HCL-25, as is part of our assessment and screening process. We also do psycho-legal documentation, as we call it, for the legal process. We do a lot of letters for lawyers for the refugee claim process, really about being able to see people, be able to talk a bit about some of the symptoms that we see and how those symptoms can affect the giving of testimony at refugee hearings. That's an important piece of our work. It's the legal piece. It's this intersection of the legal and the psychological. We also do individual and group-based work. We're going to talk more about the group-based work, but we do a lot of individual counseling as well. Referral work to health, housing, and other settlement service organizations is really important, and training as well, and public education. One thing I want to say is that in last year we had there was mention in Mariana's bio about redesigning the programs. When the repatriation of funding to the federal government happened, we got out of, we sort of fell through the cracks, one, because we do mental health work, and two, because we primarily serve refugee claimants, although we have served GARs in the past. And so we had to drop our settlement program. And so one of the things that we've done is really created a close partnership with settlement, and in this case specifically with Settlement Orientation Services, which provides settlement services for refugee claimants. That's been an important part of the group process as well, is to really partner with a settlement agency. So the integration of mental health and settlement, I think, is really important. I think those two things actually can't be separated, and that's partly what we'll talk about in terms of the group. So we'll go on to the clients. So our primary clients are survivors of torture who we get funded by the United Nations Voluntary Fund for Victims of Torture. These are people, regardless of their legal status, who fall under that definition. Refugee claimants, so these are people who are claiming refugee status in Canada and are in the process of refugee determination. And people in the Convention Refugees and Protected Persons. These are people who have been approved to be refugees and are on their way to permanent residence. We generally work with people who are up to permanent resident status. Data. So this is just a snapshot of our data. We serve generally about 250 to 300 clients a year. This year, in 2014-15, the top countries: Afghanistan, Iran, Colombia, China, and Nigeria. This changes from time to time, but this is where we're at right now. We generally serve people we don't have many youth right now. That's partly because I think a lot of the refugee claimants aren't able to come with families. When we served more GARs, we had more families, but primarily we're looking at 19 to 64. That's the biggest part of our population. Generally, it's an even split between people who are male and female identified. We do serve a lot of LGBT identified people, and so that's why the 10% as other. I'm going to speed along a bit here. I'm going to talk about, Mariana is going to talk a bit about this. This is a bit of our philosophical and therapeutic framework, are these 3 stages of trauma. And if anyone's interested, you can look up Judith Herman's work, which is 1992. It really focuses on sometimes these stages vary in names slightly, but this is what we're working at. These 3 stages of trauma, which aren't linear, they intersect depending on where someone's coming from. And this is really the therapeutic framework that we work with. The first is to provide basic safety and stabilization for the person. That's really about centering the person in themselves, their environment, having them understand the trauma itself, and being able to look at what they're being able to do the psychoeducation work. Remembrance and mourning and the reconnection work is really about working through the trauma story and being able to reconnect again with the life that they left before the trauma. This is the stage 1 work. I'm going to skip because we're going quickly here. This is the stage 1 work that Mariana will talk about, is really about looking at the psychoeducation, the emotion regulation piece. And so I'm going to turn over to Mariana to talk a bit about the group itself.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, yes, slide it all. Am I okay here? Yeah. So here we have, I hope you can see something there, a group poster. This is the Getting Through It group. And we purposefully name it the Getting Through It to point out the nature of a claim process underlying, and how this group is tailored to support claimants throughout the process. This is not a group to prepare clients for the hearing only, but to create a container and a support network at each and every step of the long and arduous refugee claim process. So, some points that you may have already recognized on the poster. This is a group specific for refugee claimants, an open group that happens every week at the SOS office in downtown, and that speaks to the partnership that we have with SOS, the one that Dylan was telling us about. And if we think about SOS, settlement services, and VAST, counseling, psychosocial support, we have a very all-encompassing combo that can serve all the needs of our clients. So the group is also multilingual, so all languages welcome, as the poster indicated. And we have language corners, so we have seen, for example, even more than 7 languages at a given time. And it works, and it happens, and it's fun. So why groups? And Dylan has already introduced us to this. Groups being a great part, a core part of our program these days. It helps us build capacity. We shrunk last year. We are pretty small, and we need to serve several clients at a given time in a very short time frame, based on the new system, or not that new anymore. But building capacity is key. Building community. And that takes us to the stage 1 work that Dylan was introducing some minutes ago. Building community is key to the healing process. Bear witness, being among others, being seen, raising my voice, hearing someone else's voices, and developing that witnessing resistance to trauma. Reestablishing connections, again, stage 1 trauma work, creating trusting relationships, getting a sense of safety internally and in the environment. Offering normalization, that's another virtue of groups. I'm going through this, others experience the same thing. I'm starting to understand that this happens and this is reasonable, natural. We even choose to call that natural instead of normal. And that's also an opportunity. Having a group setting is also an opportunity for us to have ongoing assessment, to screen clients when they are interacting with others or when they are not, and then creates the possibility of combining different elements of our program, the individual counseling and the group. So it's a very good place to refer someone to individual. So how to register for this Getting Through It group? And the purpose of this presentation is for you to have a clear sense of how the group happens and how to allow clients to approach a group as early as possible. And registration happens by phone, by email. We're pretty flexible in that sense. We need to be. You can call SOS or VAST. The intake process, a very brief one, happens on site before the group as much as possible if clients get there early enough, if not after. And it's a very brief intake form that we complete. It's not the all-encompassing intake process that we do when we do individual. And as early as possible, we cannot emphasize that enough because this is a group to support claimants throughout the whole process. So some elements of group. What we do in group is primarily stage 1 trauma healing work. So that said, we can really start to understand that we have a big piece of group that has to do with information given, because information is power, as we usually put it in group, and participants like to put it that way. I get to understand the process better. I understand the different steps. I know where I'm headed. That creates predictability, and that helps establish a sense of safety. We have an information sharing piece. We invite guest speakers, and I'm not following the order, you must have already noticed. I'm just trying to share with you what this session looks like. We have guest speakers, we have immigration lawyers coming in, we have other workers from sister organizations. We have a piece that is about previous participants that have already passed their hearing, coming in, sharing their experience at different stages of a process, and particularly during the hearing. And group members find that very meaningful and very helpful. We have a very important piece to the group that has to do with skills building. Learning to name, to identify symptoms, stuff that we're struggling with. This is the way clients call it. And learning to understand that it happens, what's going on in terms of trauma on the brain, and learning skills to tackle those symptoms. So labeling them, recognizing them, better understanding them, and practicing skills to tackle and navigate the symptomatology. Then in recognizing that that's what I'm going through, claimants may feel inclined to request individual counseling, or simply we suggest it. So the internal referral piece and the ongoing assessment is already there, happening in that group. We also have a piece that is about, of course, it flows naturally, community building. People establish connections among themselves. People are witnessed by one another, and that also creates that safety net. It comes to repair the social fabric that was ruptured by torture, trauma. What else can I think of? So I'm going to move on to a case to illustrate a client's journey with the group, for you to have a better sense of how this happens. I can think of a client, a lesbian woman from Rwanda, who got referred to group by her immigration lawyer while they were working on the BOC, the basis of a claim, basically because the lawyer couldn't access the story. He was struggling to get the story from the client, and he thought that the client could benefit from talking. So the client joined the group in the early stages of a claim process. Through the participation at the group, she got to understand the process better, the work with the lawyer. Safety was established there. In group sessions, she practiced what it was like to work with an interpreter. So that also helped her feel more comfortable in that working triad. She learned what to expect after the BOC. I submitted eligibility interview, that's what it's going to look like, and then I have a hearing date, so a sense of predictability. She made connections with group participants. At group, we recognize housing needs. We refer her to Balcony House. She moved there. She got to know about rainbow refugee meetings, and she got involved in the community and created very meaningful relationships as she became part of the rainbow community. Rainbow Refugee provided a letter for her case, so did VAST, because in the process, as we progressed, we found that she could benefit from individual counseling, so she did access individual. And we conducted a psychological assessment of trauma symptomatology, and we included that in the letter to the lawyer to support the claim. She met people. She got connected to the point that some of the fellow group members accompanied to the IRB the day of her hearing. And she's now a refugee, a brand new convention refugee, ready to take part in the other group that we're offering that I'll tell you a little bit about toward the end. So this is this random woman's experience with getting through it. She got through it, and she's now coming back to group, and this happens very often, to bear witness, to continue to bear witness, and to share her experience with other claimants. So some of the things that clients say about the group and their experience with the group. When I first arrived, and I don't know them by heart, you're reading them already, right? I was so lost, I couldn't speak. Now I'm coming back to share my strength with others. I feel more prepared each time. Hearing from people who have been through it, people in my shoes, gave me courage and hope. We are so different, but also we are similar. We are together. Group participants refer to the group as their new family, their Canadian family, and a place where they know people understand. So I have 1 minute left, and I think this is a good place to wrap up this conversation when I'm bringing to you the clients' voices. This is also what we try to bring to the foreground at group, allowing them to have their voice, to reclaim their voice throughout the process, to sit at the driver's seat, and to help to feel that the lawyer, VAST, counselor, and the SOS worker, and the group are all here to support them in get through it. Now, to wrap up, we have another component to the program that is a Now What group. And it's definitely the Now What. I'm now a refugee, a brand new convention refugee. I'm here to stay. Lots to keep working on. And that's the purpose of this new group that we've just launched. And we can tell you more about it some other time. Or you can call us or email us if you remain curious. So that's about it for us. Vamos.